The night of April 9th, 1973, Beirut's coastal boulevard shimmered under streetlights as waves crashed against the shore. Inside a luxurious apartment building in the Verdun district, three men sat discussing the next day's operations. These weren't ordinary residents. They were commanders of the Palestinian Liberation Organization's most elite units, orchestrating attacks that had claimed dozens of Israeli lives. Outside, in the darkness, rental cars moved into position. Behind their wheels sat men and women who didn't exist on paper, carrying passports from countries they'd never lived in, speaking Arabic with flawless Lebanese accents. In exactly 2 hours, these phantom operatives would walk through those apartment doors and change the course of Middle Eastern history forever. What happened next would become one of the most audacious intelligence operations ever executed on foreign soil. But before we dive into this incredible story, hit that subscribe button right now. This channel brings you the most gripping, untold stories of Mossad operations. And trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. The operation that would come to be known as Spring of Youth didn't begin in 1973. Its roots stretched back to a gymnasium in Munich, Germany, 8 months earlier. September 5th, 1972. The Olympic Games, a celebration of international unity, became a slaughterhouse when 8 Palestinian terrorists from the Black September organization stormed the Israeli athletic compound. 11 Israeli athletes and coaches died that day. The world watched in horror as the crisis unfolded on live television. But Israel didn't just watch. Prime Minister Golda Meir made a decision that would define Israeli policy for decades to come. In a closed cabinet meeting, her words were sharp and unambiguous. There would be no negotiations with terrorists. There would be no mercy for those who planned massacres. There would only be justice, delivered by any means necessary. The intelligence apparatus swung into motion. Mossad, Israel's foreign intelligence service, began compiling dossiers. Shin Bet, the internal security service, provided crucial information from interrogations. Military intelligence cross-referenced communications intercepts. 3 names rose to the top of every list. Mohammed Youssef al-Najjar, known as Abu Yusuf, the chief of operations for Fatah and Black September's operational commander. Kamal Adwan, responsible for terrorist operations inside Israel itself. Kamal Nasser, the PLO's official spokesman, who used his position to coordinate attacks while maintaining a veneer of political legitimacy. All 3 lived in Beirut, Lebanon, a country technically at war with Israel, but whose capital had become a paradise for Palestinian leadership. They moved freely through the city, protected by layers of security, surrounded by loyal fighters, confident in their untouchability. The Lebanese government, weakened by internal divisions and the growing Palestinian presence, couldn't stop them even if it wanted to. The Palestinian refugee camps had become states within a state, armed fortresses from which operations were planned and launched. Mossad's director, Zvi Zamir, presented the cabinet with a plan so bold it seemed impossible. Not an assassination by sniper or car bomb from a distance, not a missile strike that would kill dozens of civilians, but a surgical ground operation, deep in enemy territory, in the heart of a hostile capital city, extracting maximum intelligence while eliminating the targets. The mission would require dozens of operatives, perfect coordination between naval commandos, intelligence agents, and support teams. One mistake would mean capture, torture, and an international scandal that could isolate Israel diplomatically. Golda Meir listened to every detail. She asked about casualty projections, escape routes, diplomatic fallout. Then she gave her approval with a single sentence: "Bring me their heads." The planning phase consumed 3 months. Every detail mattered, because there would be no second chances. Sayeret Matkal, Israel's most elite special forces unit, would conduct the actual assassinations. Naval commandos from Shayatet 13 would provide backup and secure escape routes. But before any soldier could pull a trigger, Mossad's intelligence division had to solve an impossible puzzle. How do you move dozens of armed commandos through a city crawling with PLO fighters, Lebanese security forces, and Syrian intelligence officers? The answer came from an unlikely source: the Beirut rental car market. Lebanon in the early 70s was experiencing an economic boom. Tourism flourished. International businesses opened offices. European and American visitors filled hotels. And they all needed cars. Rental agencies proliferated, offering everything from economy sedans to luxury vehicles, asking few questions as long as the credit cards worked, and the deposits cleared. Mossad had spent years building what intelligence professionals call infrastructure, not weapons caches or safe houses, though those existed too, but something more subtle and far more valuable. A network of seemingly ordinary businesses, bank accounts, and identities that could support operations without raising suspicion. In Beirut alone, they maintained at least 4 different corporate fronts: import-export companies that actually moved goods, consulting firms with real clients, and most crucially for this operation, connections to vehicle rental agencies. The logistics team faced a unique challenge. They needed multiple vehicles, but renting them all at once would attract attention. Different cars from different agencies, each rented by a different person, using different documents, all untraceable back to Israel or each other. The vehicles had to be reliable, fast enough for quick getaways, but common enough not to stand out in traffic. They needed cars that could carry armed teams, absorb potential damage, and be abandoned without regrets. 3 weeks before the operation, the first rental occurred. A French businessman named Henri Lefebvre walked into an agency near Beirut's commercial district. His passport appeared genuine because technically it was. French intelligence, in a rare moment of cooperation with Mossad, had provided legitimate blank passports. The serial numbers existed in French government databases. Henri Lefebvre's identity had been carefully constructed over months. Credit history, business registration, even a small apartment in Marseille that he'd never visited but which received his mail. He wanted to rent a Renault for 2 weeks. Business meetings across the city, potential clients to visit, the usual corporate travel needs. He paid the deposit in cash, provided a local contact number that rang to a Mossad-controlled answering service, and drove away in a dark blue sedan. The rental agency clerk made a routine notation in the logbook and forgot about the transaction within minutes. 2 days later, across town, an Italian photographer named Alessandro Romano rented a Peugeot station wagon. He needed space for equipment, he explained, in fluent Arabic with an Italian accent. Fashion shoot on the coast, very important client, you understand. His charm worked. The clerk even recommended scenic locations. The pattern continued: a German engineer, a Swiss banker, an Austrian journalist, each from a different agency, each with bulletproof documentation, each renting ordinary vehicles for ordinary-sounding reasons. By the time the operation launched, 9 cars sat parked in various locations across Beirut, keys hidden in prearranged spots, ready to move. But vehicles alone wouldn't be enough. The teams needed to move through the city invisible, which meant understanding Beirut at a granular level that no map could provide. Where did police patrol at night? Which intersections had the longest light cycles? What streets offered multiple escape routes? Where could you park without attracting attention? Mossad dispatched advanced scouts months before the operation. These weren't commandos, but intelligence officers trained in surveillance and reconnaissance. They looked like tourists because they acted like tourists. They photographed everything: building entrances, parking areas, security posts, the locations of police stations and military checkpoints. They timed traffic patterns at different hours. They mapped which cafes stayed open late, which buildings had night doormen, which alleys dead-ended, and which offered throughways. One operative posed as a real estate investor, spending weeks viewing apartments in target neighborhoods. His interest in properties gave him legitimate reasons to photograph buildings, ask about security measures, study floor plans. He learned which apartments had rear exits, which buildings connected to others through basements, which rooftops offered access to adjacent structures. Every piece of information went into expanding dossiers that would guide the assault teams. Another operative, a woman, worked as a language teacher, building relationships with Lebanese students and professionals. Through casual conversations, she mapped social networks, learned family connections, identified who knew whom. This information helped Mossad understand the warning networks that might activate if something went wrong. If shooting started, who would call whom? How fast would reinforcements arrive? Which PLO safe houses sat closest to the target apartments? The targets themselves required constant surveillance. Abu Youssef lived in a 5th-floor apartment in Verdun, a fashionable coastal district popular with wealthy Lebanese and Palestinian officials. His building had a doorman until midnight, then relied on a locked main entrance. He kept irregular hours, sometimes returning home at 2 or 3 in the morning after meetings with other PLO leaders. He traveled with a rotating team of bodyguards, usually 2 to 4 armed men. His apartment had reinforced doors, but like most residential buildings in Beirut, it wasn't designed as a fortress. Kamal Adwan's residence sat nearby, close enough that assault teams could hit both locations in quick succession. His security arrangements were similar: armed guards, irregular schedule, confidence born from living in what he considered friendly territory. He'd survived Israeli attempts on his life before, growing increasingly bold in his movements around the city. Kamal Nasser lived farther away in the Rue Verdun district, in a building filled with Palestinian officials and sympathizers. His apartment served double duty as an office where he drafted propaganda statements and coordinated with journalists. He considered himself a political figure, not a military target, though Mossad's intelligence showed his deep involvement in operational planning. The surveillance teams documented everything. They photographed the targets entering and leaving buildings, identifying bodyguards, noting when security was heaviest and when it relaxed. They tracked movement patterns, learning where each man went and when. They identified mistresses, friends, meeting spots. They built psychological profiles, understanding each target's habits, fears, and blind spots. By late March 1973, the intelligence picture was complete. Mossad knew where the targets would be on any given night within a 2-hour window. They knew how many guards protected each location. They knew which doors locked and which didn't, which stairs led where, which windows faced which direction. They'd built a virtual model of the target zone in their minds, rehearsing movements on mock-ups constructed at training facilities in Israel. Now came the hardest part: getting the assault teams into position without triggering any of the dozens of warning systems that might unravel the operation. The commandos couldn't simply fly into Beirut airport. Lebanese intelligence photographed every arriving passenger, cross-referencing faces against known Israeli agents. Entry stamps and passports told stories. If French intelligence flagged suspicious entries, the word might reach their Lebanese counterparts. Syrian intelligence maintained a heavy presence in Lebanon, watching for Israeli activity. One blown identity could compromise the entire operation. Instead, Mossad chose the sea, the same sea that had brought ancient Phoenician traders to these shores, that connected Beirut to the broader Mediterranean world, would deliver Israel's response to Munich. On the night of April 6th, 3 days before the operation, Israeli naval vessels moved into position off the Lebanese coast. Shayetet 13 commandos prepared rubber boats, checking engines, loading weapons sealed in waterproof containers, reviewing rendezvous coordinates. These weren't typical small craft used for covert beach landings. They were high-speed Zodiac-style boats, capable of covering the distance from international waters to shore quickly, while staying below radar detection. The sea approach solved multiple problems: no airport security to evade, no border crossing where guards might ask uncomfortable questions, no paper trail connecting Israeli citizens to Lebanese entry points. The commandos would simply materialize on the beach like ghosts, disappearing inland before anyone noticed their arrival. But they still needed to move from the beach to the target apartments, which meant the rental cars had to be in position, and someone had to be waiting with keys. The Mossad advance team in Beirut consisted of 8 operatives living under deep cover, some for years. They weren't temporary visitors, but embedded agents with full lives constructed around their false identities. One ran an import business that actually imported goods. Another worked as a translator for international companies. A third managed a small hotel frequented by European tourists. These weren't covers you could maintain for weeks. They required months or years of patient development, building relationships, establishing credibility, becoming part of the city's fabric. These operatives would serve as the crucial bridge between the naval landing and the assault phase. They would position the rental cars, provide final intelligence updates, ensure escape routes remained clear, and most importantly, guide the assault teams through a city they'd studied but never physically walked. On April 8th, the day before the operation, the advance team activated. Each operative received coded messages through prearranged channels: a classified advertisement in a French newspaper, a specific phrase spoken during a phone call to a Geneva trading company, a postcard mailed from Cyprus with a particular stamp placement. To any outside observer, these were random communications. To the trained operatives, they contained precise instructions and timing. The rental cars began moving into final positions. The dark blue Renault that Henri Lefebvre had rented drove to a parking area 3 blocks from the beach, tucked between other vehicles where it wouldn't attract attention. The keys went into a magnetic box attached under the rear bumper. A second car positioned itself near a main boulevard that offered quick access to the coastal road. A third parked in an alley with sightlines to Abu Yusef's apartment building. Each vehicle received a final inspection. Fuel tanks topped off, tire pressure checked, emergency equipment stored in trunks, medical kits, bolt cutters, spare ammunition magazines sealed in cloth bags to prevent rattling. The operatives wiped down interiors, removing any trace evidence that might later connect vehicles to Israeli intelligence. These cars had to appear exactly like what they supposedly were, ordinary rentals driven by ordinary people. Meanwhile, the psychological dimension of the operation intensified. Mossad wanted the targets relaxed, following their normal routines, not spooked into changing security procedures. This required theater at the highest level. In European capitals, Mossad allowed carefully controlled leaks, suggesting their focus had shifted elsewhere. A supposed assassination attempt in Rome, intelligence gathering in Paris, rumors of operations planned against Palestinian targets in Cyprus. The goal was to pull PLO security attention away from Beirut, making it seem like the threat existed somewhere else. The deception worked, perhaps too well. On the evening of April 9th, all three primary targets were in their Beirut apartments, following normal schedules. Abu Yusef had returned from meetings around 9 p.m., accompanied by his wife and his usual bodyguard detail. Kamal Adwan was home with family. Kamal Nasser sat in his apartment, likely drafting another propaganda statement condemning Israeli aggression, completely unaware that the very aggression he denounced was about to arrive at his door. As midnight approached, the Israeli naval vessels reached their launch positions. The sea was calm, a stroke of luck for an operation where everything depended on precise timing. The commandos boarded their boats, approximately 40 elite soldiers from Sayeret Matkal and Shayetet 13. Among them were men who would later become legendary figures in Israeli military history. Ehud Barak, future prime minister, led one assault team. Yonatan Netanyahu, whose younger brother Benjamin would also eventually lead Israel, commanded another group. These weren't ordinary soldiers, but the absolute peak of Israeli special operations capability. The boats moved toward shore, engines quiet, running lights off, navigating by compass and GPS coordinates. The beach they'd chosen was relatively isolated, away from the tourist hotels and nightlife districts where witnesses might spot a military landing. It sat in a pocket of darkness between streetlights, with access roads leading inland. Mossad's advance team had scouted this exact location weeks earlier, confirming it offered the concealment and approach routes the operation required. At 12:45 a.m., the boats reached shore. The commandos moved with practiced efficiency, dragging craft above the tide line, camouflaging them with tarps and beach debris, preparing for the possibility they might need a rapid maritime extraction if ground escape routes became compromised. Within minutes, they'd transformed from a naval unit into what appeared to be ordinary people moving through the city, albeit ordinary people carrying concealed weapons and radio equipment. This was where the rental cars and false identities became crucial. 40 armed commandos couldn't simply walk through Beirut's streets to their targets. Even at 1 a.m., there were people around. Late-night cafes, patrol cars, insomniacs looking out windows. A large group of fit young men moving with military precision would trigger immediate suspicion. But small groups of 2 or 3 people getting into ordinary rental cars, driving to different destinations, following traffic laws, stopping at red lights, that was invisible. The advance team operatives materialized from the darkness, making contact with their military counterparts. Brief whispered exchanges confirmed identities through pre-arranged code phrases. The operatives distributed car keys, provided final updates on target locations and security status, handed over building floor plans with last-minute corrections based on that evening's surveillance. Then came the critical transformation. The commandos changed clothes, swapping military gear for civilian attire that would pass quick inspection. They couldn't look like tourists. That would be suspicious at this hour. But they could look like young men returning from late parties, businessmen working odd hours, residents heading home. Several female Mossad operatives had infiltrated with the advance team, and now they played a crucial role. Men and women together in cars attracted far less attention than male-only groups. It provided cover, a veneer of normalcy that could survive casual observation. The rental cars rolled out from their staging positions, converging on the target zone from different directions. No convoys, no obvious coordination, just separate vehicles making separate journeys that would coincidentally arrive at the same neighborhood within minutes of each other. The drivers followed the routes Mossad had planned, avoiding checkpoints, taking streets with minimal traffic cameras, choosing paths that offered multiple escape options if something went wrong. Inside the vehicles, the commandos conducted final weapons checks. They carried suppressed pistols for close quarters work, compact submachine guns for if things got loud, plastic explosives for breaching reinforced doors, and enough ammunition to fight their way out if the operation collapsed into open combat. But the preference was surgical precision. Get in, eliminate the targets, extract intelligence materials, get out before Lebanese security or PLO reinforcements could respond. At 1:30 a.m., the first vehicles reached the Verdun district. The neighborhood was quiet, but not deserted. A few cars moved along the coastal road. Lights glowed in scattered apartments. A police car sat parked near an intersection, officers inside drinking coffee, completely unaware of what was about to unfold blocks away. The assault teams parked in pre-planned positions, establishing a perimeter around the target buildings. Some cars remained running, with designated drivers behind the wheels, ready for immediate extraction. Others disgorged their passengers, who melted into shadows, moving toward building entrances with the fluid coordination that comes from countless rehearsals. Abu Yusuf's apartment building presented the first challenge. The main entrance was locked after midnight, accessible only to residents with keys. But Mossad's advanced reconnaissance had revealed a service entrance used by maintenance workers, secured by a simple lock that could be picked in seconds. A two-person team approached this door, while the main assault group waited in position. The lock yielded quickly to practiced hands. The door opened into a service corridor that bypassed the main lobby, providing direct access to the stairwell. The team moved inside, hand signals coordinating their advance. They climbed toward the 5th floor, where Abu Yusuf's apartment was located. Each step measured, weapons ready, knowing that any encounter with a resident or guard before reaching the target could compromise everything. Meanwhile, a second team prepared to hit Kamal Adwan's nearby residence simultaneously. The operation's success depended on speed and synchronization. If they hit one target and the others were warned, security would lock down, bodyguards would go on high alert, and the element of surprise would evaporate. Both assaults had to happen within minutes of each other, ideally before anyone could make a phone call or sound an alarm. The team leader checked his watch. 1:43 a.m. He keyed his radio, sending a brief signal to the other assault groups and to the command element monitoring from a safe house across the city. Green light. All teams in position. No complications detected. At 1:45 a.m., the operation transitioned from infiltration to action. The team outside Abu Yusuf's apartment door consisted of 6 commandos, including Ehud Barak, who would personally lead the breach. They'd studied the apartment's layout from floor plans, photographs, and intelligence reports. The main door opened into a foyer. Beyond that, a living area where bodyguards typically waited. Bedrooms branched off a central corridor. Abu Yusuf usually slept in the master bedroom at the apartment's far end, his wife beside him, his weapons within reach, because even in Beirut, he understood he was a target. The commandos placed a small-shaped charge on the door's lock mechanism. Not enough explosive to blow the door off its hinges and alert the entire building, but sufficient to defeat the lock and any interior bolts. A 3-count. The charge detonated with a sharp crack that echoed through the stairwell. The door flew inward. The assault team poured through, moving with choreographed precision. Suppressed pistols coughed as they engaged the 2 bodyguards in the living area. The guards barely had time to reach for their weapons before 9mm rounds dropped them. The commandos flowed past, clearing rooms, searching for the primary target. Abu Yusuf emerged from the bedroom, perhaps woken by the initial explosive breach, fumbling for a pistol on his nightstand. He never reached it. Multiple rounds hit him center mass, the suppressed weapons making sounds like heavy books dropped on a floor. He collapsed backward onto the bed as his wife screamed. The team leader moved to her, speaking rapid Arabic, telling her to be quiet, to lie down, to stay still. They weren't there to kill civilians, but they couldn't leave witnesses who might immediately alert other PLO leaders. She would be left alive, but restrained, giving the assault teams precious extra minutes before the alarm spread. While half the team secured the apartment and its occupants, The other half began the intelligence collection phase. This wasn't just an assassination, it was an intelligence raid. They photographed documents on Abu Yusef's desk, stuffed papers into bags, opened drawers, searching for communications, contact lists, operational plans. Every piece of paper could contain information about future attacks, organizational structures, or other high-value targets. The entire sequence from door breach to target elimination to intelligence collection took less than 4 minutes. As the team prepared to withdraw, the radio crackled with confirmation from the second assault group. Kamal Adwan's apartment had been hit simultaneously. He too was dead, along with his security detail. Intelligence materials recovered, no Israeli casualties. The third target, Kamal Nasser, presented a different challenge because his apartment building sat farther away, meaning the team there couldn't coordinate as precisely with the first 2 strikes. By the time Yonatan Netanyahu's group reached Nasser's door, phones across Beirut had begun ringing. Someone had heard something. Someone had called someone. The warnings were beginning to cascade through the PLO's communication network. Netanyahu's team didn't have the luxury of careful planning. They blew through Nasser's door with more explosive force, knowing speed now mattered more than stealth. The spokesman died in a brief firefight, his bodyguards getting off several shots before being cut down. The gunfire echoed through the building, definitely alerting residents and probably alerting police across the neighborhood. The extraction phase began immediately. The assault teams withdrew from the apartments, moving back toward the waiting vehicles faster than they'd ascended. Behind them, they left destruction. Dead men, terrified witnesses, and a message that would echo through the Palestinian leadership. You are not safe. We will find you. We will reach you wherever you hide. But first, they had to escape a city that was beginning to wake up to the realization that something catastrophic had occurred. The rental cars scattered in multiple directions, following pre-planned escape routes designed to confuse any pursuit. Some headed toward the coastal road, others drove inland. A few moved south toward the airport district, even though they had no intention of leaving by air. The goal was to fragment any response, make it impossible for Lebanese security to establish a cordon, ensure that even if some vehicles were stopped, others would escape. Police radios crackled with confused reports. Shooting in Verdun, multiple casualties, Palestinians involved, maybe a factional dispute, maybe Lebanese militants. The idea that this could be an Israeli operation seemed initially too audacious to consider. How could Israeli commandos be operating in central Beirut? How could they have penetrated this deeply into Lebanese territory? The confusion bought precious minutes. Lebanese security forces scrambled to respond, but they didn't know what they were responding to. Reports conflicted. Some witnesses described men in civilian clothes. Others mentioned what sounded like military operations. The number of attackers varied wildly in different accounts, from a handful to dozens. This fog of war was exactly what the Israeli planners had anticipated and exploited. Meanwhile, the rental cars moved through the night. At predetermined checkpoints, drivers made quick decisions based on what they observed. If a route looked clear, they continued. If police presence seemed heavy, they diverted to backup paths. The vehicles never traveled together, maintaining separation that made them look like ordinary late-night traffic, rather than a coordinated military withdrawal. One car encountered a police checkpoint that hadn't existed during the planning phase. A random vehicle inspection point, the kind Lebanese authorities set up periodically to search for weapons or contraband. The driver, a female Mossad operative, approached calmly. In the back seat, 2 commandos sat with hands near concealed weapons, prepared to fight if the inspection became thorough. But the operative's flawless Arabic and convincing cover story worked. She was driving friends home from a party. Here were their identification cards, all Lebanese residents. No, they hadn't heard any shooting. Must have been in a different neighborhood. The police officer waved them through without checking the trunk, where enough weapons and explosives sat to start a small war. Other vehicles faced no obstacles at all, flowing through the sparse early morning traffic and reaching their staging areas without incident. The operational plan called for the teams to converge on several locations before making the final extraction to the beach. They couldn't all arrive at once, because that would create exactly the kind of conspicuous gathering they'd worked so hard to avoid throughout the operation. By 2:15 a.m., the first elements reached the beach rendezvous point. The area remained quiet, exactly as Mossad's advance team had promised. The rubber boats sat where they'd been hidden, undisturbed and ready. But not all the assault teams had arrived yet. The question now, was whether to wait, risking discovery as Lebanese security mobilized, or to begin evacuating and potentially abandon teams still making their way through the city. The decision came from the mission commander, monitoring communications from the command post. All teams had reported successful target elimination. All teams were mobile and moving toward extraction. No casualties on the Israeli side. The mission's primary objectives were accomplished. Now, survival and escape became paramount. The evacuation began in stages. As each vehicle arrived at the beach, its occupants transferred to the boats, while other team members provided security, scanning the approaches for any signs of pursuit or discovery. The commandos stripped off civilian clothes, changing back into military gear more suitable for a sea journey. Weapons were checked, ammunition redistributed, wounded assessed, though miraculously, there were none. The rental cars that had served so faithfully throughout the operation now became potential evidence. The Mossad operatives wiped them down methodically, removing fingerprints, checking for anything that might provide forensic leads. Then, they simply abandoned them. By morning, Lebanese police would find the vehicles, trace them back to rental agencies, discover the false identities used to rent them, and hit dead ends at every turn. Henri Lefebvre's trail would disappear into French bureaucracy. Alessandro Romano would prove impossible to locate in Italy. Every identity had been constructed to withstand investigation without revealing Israeli involvement. By 2:45 a.m., the last assault team reached the beach. Behind them, Beirut's night was alive with sirens and activity. Police cars raced through streets. Ambulances converged on the target buildings. Palestinian fighters poured out of refugee camps, armed and angry, but with no clear enemy to fight. Lebanese military units mobilized, but their orders were confused because the situation itself was confused. Who had attacked? Where had they gone? Were they still in the city or long gone? The rubber boats pushed off from shore, engines roaring to life as soon as they reached deep enough water. The commandos hunched low, weapons ready in case Lebanese naval units or Syrian patrol boats tried to intercept, but the sea remained empty. The Israeli naval vessels waited in international waters, invisible in the darkness, radar systems tracking the approaching craft. Within 30 minutes, the rubber boats reached the motherships. Crane cables lifted them from the water. Commandos scrambled up nets and onto decks where they were met by naval personnel, medical teams, and intelligence officers ready to debrief. The vessels turned west, moving away from the Lebanese coast at high speed, putting distance between themselves and any potential pursuit. As dawn broke on April 10, 1973, Israel's commando teams were safely back in Israeli waters. Behind them in Beirut, the city awakened to discover 3 of the Palestinian movement's most important leaders dead, along with more than a dozen bodyguards and several other PLO operatives caught in the crossfire. Lebanese authorities scrambled to explain how such a massive security breach could have occurred. Palestinian factions screamed for revenge, while simultaneously launching internal investigations to identify how Israeli intelligence had penetrated so deeply into their operations. The intelligence materials seized from the apartments proved as valuable as the assassinations themselves. Documents revealed organizational structures, communication methods, and most critically, plans for future attacks. Mossad analysts pored over everything, building new target lists, identifying additional operations to disrupt, expanding their understanding of how the Palestinian organizations functioned. But perhaps the operation's most significant impact was psychological. The message sent wasn't subtle. It told Palestinian leadership that nowhere was safe. Not in Beirut, not surrounded by bodyguards, not protected by Lebanese sovereignty or international law. If Israel wanted to reach you, it could. If you planned attacks against Israeli citizens, you became a target yourself, regardless of where you hid. The operation also demonstrated capabilities that shocked intelligence services worldwide. The coordination required, the infiltration achieved, the precision executed, all of it represented a level of operational sophistication that few agencies could match. Mossad had essentially conducted a military raid deep inside a hostile capital, eliminated multiple high-value targets, extracted intelligence, and withdrawn without losing a single operative. It was audacious to the point of recklessness, yet executed with such professionalism that it succeeded completely. International reaction split predictably. Arab nations condemned the operation as state terrorism, a violation of Lebanese sovereignty, and an act of war. Western nations offered muted criticism, while privately acknowledging the operation's technical brilliance. The United Nations debated resolutions. Diplomats exchanged harsh words. But none of it changed the fundamental reality. 3 men who planned terrorist attacks were dead, and Israel had sent an unmistakable message about the consequences of targeting its citizens. For the rental car agencies in Beirut, the aftermath brought unwelcome attention. Lebanese security forces investigated every recent rental, questioned every clerk, examined every document. The false identities held up under scrutiny because they'd been built to do exactly that. Henri Lefebvre existed in French databases. His passport was genuine, even if the man carrying it wasn't. The same applied to all the cover identities. Investigators could trace the paper trails as far as they wanted, but every path led nowhere useful. The agencies themselves were innocent victims of sophisticated intelligence tradecraft. They'd followed their procedures, checked documents that appeared legitimate, accepted payment that cleared without issues. How were they supposed to know that the polite French businessman or the charming Italian photographer worked for Mossad? The rental cars had served their purpose perfectly, providing exactly the kind of ordinary, forgettable transportation that allowed extraordinary operations to unfold invisibly. In the weeks following Operation Spring of Youth, as it became officially known, Israeli intelligence monitored Palestinian communications for reactions. The intercepts revealed panic, paranoia, and a dramatic shift in security procedures. Leadership figures changed departments frequently. Bodyguard details doubled or tripled. Some commanders stopped sleeping in known locations altogether, moving between safe houses on unpredictable schedules. The fear that Mossad could strike anywhere, anytime, fundamentally changed how Palestinian organizations operated. But the operation also had costs that became apparent only later. It contributed to the destabilization of Lebanon, already struggling with the tensions created by the large Palestinian presence. It provided ammunition to those arguing that Lebanon's weak government couldn't protect its sovereignty or control foreign armed groups operating from its territory. These tensions would eventually contribute to Lebanon's devastating civil war that erupted 2 years later in 1975. For Mossad, Operation Spring of Youth became a case study in how intelligence agencies could achieve strategic objectives through carefully planned covert action. The operation's success validated the massive investment in building and maintaining deep cover identities, front companies, and logistical infrastructure. Those rental cars didn't just appear because someone walked into an agency with a fake passport. They existed because Mossad had spent years building the networks, relationships, and financial mechanisms that made such operations possible. The commandos who participated in the operation mostly returned to normal military service, though several would rise to prominent positions in Israeli politics and security. Ehud Barak eventually became prime minister. Yonatan Netanyahu died 3 years later, leading the famous Entebbe raid, but his participation in Operation Spring of Youth cemented his reputation as one of Israel's most capable special forces officers. For these men, Beirut represented both a stunning success and a reminder of how thin the line was between triumph and disaster. The Mossad operatives who'd lived under deep cover in Beirut faced a different challenge. Some could continue their false lives because their involvement in the operation remained unknown to Lebanese authorities. Others had to be extracted, their covers burned, years of patient work abandoned because the risk of discovery became too high. These operatives had lived double lives, maintaining relationships with Lebanese friends and colleagues while secretly working for Israel's intelligence service. The psychological toll of such existence was immense, discussed only in classified debriefings and psychological evaluations. For the families of the killed Palestinian leaders, the operation brought tragedy that international politics couldn't erase. Abu Yusef's wife, who survived the assault, became a widow in an instant, her husband killed in their bedroom. She later spoke publicly about the trauma, describing how the commandos moved with clinical efficiency, killing her husband and departing with barely a word. From her perspective, it was murder. From Israel's perspective, it was justice for Munich and countless other attacks. The rental cars themselves, abandoned on Beirut's streets, eventually returned to the agencies that owned them. Police released them after forensic examination revealed nothing useful. The agencies cleaned them, checked them for damage, and put them back into service. Those ordinary vehicles had played supporting roles in one of the most significant intelligence operations of the 20th century. Yet, within weeks, they were just rental cars again, carrying tourists and businessmen who had no idea of their history. The operation's legacy extended far beyond 1973. It established patterns and precedents that Israel would follow for decades. The combination of intelligence gathering, special forces operations, and targeted killings became a cornerstone of Israeli counterterrorism strategy. The techniques pioneered in Beirut, using deep cover operatives, false identities, and civilian infrastructure to support military operations, were refined and repeated in operations across the Middle East and beyond. But perhaps most significantly, Operation Spring of Youth demonstrated that modern intelligence operations required far more than just brave soldiers and clever spies. They required the patience to build infrastructure years in advance, the resources to maintain front companies and false identities, the sophistication to move through foreign cities invisibly, using ordinary elements like rental cars to achieve extraordinary objectives. Intelligence work wasn't just about secrets and shootings. It was about logistics, planning, and the unglamorous work of creating the conditions that made dramatic operations possible. As the sun rose over the Mediterranean on April 10, 1973, 3 Palestinian leaders lay dead in Beirut apartments. Dozens of Mossad operatives and Israeli commandos sailed safely home, and scattered across the city, 9 rental cars sat abandoned, silent witnesses to how intelligence services wage war in the shadows, using the ordinary infrastructure of modern life to deliver extraordinary violence. The operation achieved its immediate objectives. The targeted leaders were eliminated, intelligence was gathered, the message was sent. But it also demonstrated a fundamental truth about covert operations. Success depended as much on the mundane details, like which cars to rent and where to park them, as on the dramatic moments of violence that made headlines. The rental cars weren't footnotes to the operation. They were essential components without which nothing else could have happened. Years later, when intelligence historians analyzed Operation Spring of Youth, they focused on the careful planning, the successful intelligence gathering, and the flawless execution. But they also noted something else. The operation worked because Mossad understood that in covert action, the most important weapons aren't guns or explosives. They're the ordinary elements of everyday life, transformed through planning and preparation into tools that can change history. Sometimes the difference between success and failure, between achieving objectives and catastrophic failure, comes down to something as simple as having the right car, with the right papers, parked in the right place at the right time.